Hiya, welcome to DASDIA, Learning Language of Autism, and welcome to the first chapter of our Senses series. And we are talking this week about hearing, sound, auditory sensitivity within autistic people. Although you don't have to be autistic to have sensory processing disorder is the medical term for it. It's a standalone condition, but I am, talking about it from an autistic person's realm, as my whole website is and YouTube channel is all about autism and all things related. So this subject is regarding the sensory processing that a lot of autistic people endure throughout their whole lives, right from birth. So we will go through all the senses, as I said in my introduction, but this one is going to be about the auditory sensory sensitivities. So usually when someone, your loved one or a client or a pupil who's autistic has auditory processing challenges, you will know through various means. Now, when our boy was very young, like as in 12 months old, till he was about 5, he wasn't aware that he could manage this sound that came into him the way he does now. So when he was really little, he would spend a lot of time headbanging, banging his head on concrete, on walls, on anything at all. And he'd spend a lot of time away from people. He'd spend his time in his room a lot. He was very distressed. And of course, then I didn't know what was going on when he was, a young baby. I didn't know why. It was really tricky. So there are other reasons why autistic children headbang and do various things, but for George it was because of the sound was so much, but he didn't know how to manage it, and we didn't know what was going on. So a sensitive auditory person so the sorts of things that can affect them is sound as sound. So if the television's on, or there's a traffic sound, or the radio's on, or lots of people talking, that kind of thing. Musical instruments, loud sudden noises, car horns, just everyday noise. But it can also be the pitch of a sound. It could be the frequency of a sound, the tone of a sound. It can also be a particular sound, like they might like music, but they might not like it when a trumpet plays within that music, or a piano, but they might love music, but just not the piano instrument. It's very intricate and detailed. It's not just like, oh, well, they don't like sound. It's and with it, because although George is very sensitive and he holds his fingers here, so if you've seen, look here close to the camera, he doesn't put his fingers in his ears. He kind of puts his fingers here, and he has 2 ways that he blocks the sound as best he can. He presses down here, and he kind of controls that a lot. He does that himself, and sometimes he wears ear defenders when he can manage it, but he generally, as a rule, he just manages his way through his day and his life using his own fingers. And obviously when I'm with him, I know certain sounds on the radio, certain instruments, so I will turn the radio down to help ease his discomfort. It's a real biggie because obviously the world's a noisy place, so there's sounds coming from everywhere. But if your child is happy to wear headphones, I'd strongly recommend that from as young as you can get. And they can hear other sounds. It's not like, don't worry or think, oh, well, if I put headphones on them, how are they going to engage in life? It's like, you know what? if they need it to help them engage in. It's often the opposite to what a neurotypical person would think. It's like actually they need those headphones so that they can engage in life. Without it, they are so consumed with sound and stresses of that nature that they can't even begin to engage because it's just too overwhelming. Remember, we're talking about people whose ears and hearing is so heightened and so sensitive that they can still hear, and I've put them on, you can still hear people talking, you can still hear the cinema, for example, with headphones on. It just cancels out a lot of the noise. If you can do that for as young as possible, I highly recommend it. And also help manage the noise input within your, especially at home, in your home environment. If you can make it, like make sure the telly's not on too loud, make sure there's not like the telly and the radio and then there's people talking and there's just, especially when they're very young, while they're getting used to all these different sounds and they're trying to get used to what is going on with their own systems. And then slowly as they grow and they develop and they become more experienced in life, then sometimes things can become more manageable and they can cope with more sounds, or you just need to adapt and change your home environment or school environment or wherever they spend a lot of their time. It can be very frustrating for the autistic person because, for example, our boy loves swimming. He loves it. It's his favourite thing. Water is like his top thing. But when we first took him to a swimming pool, he screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed, and we was thinking, what's going on? He loves water. Why doesn't he like it here? Well, it was because it was so noisy. It was so loud and echoey. So the sound was loud, and it was random sounds he couldn't pinpoint. The splashing and the squealing and the delight, and then all that echo, and then the water from all the sound from all the fans. It was like insane. So it wasn't that he didn't want to go in the pool, it was just he couldn't understand the sound sensations and it was overwhelming. And then once we figured that out, we'd kind of put our hands over his ears, and once he was in the water and engaged in the water, he was fine. And he just kind of he didn't get over it. He just became slowly, we accustomed him to it. But my point there is that sometimes an activity or a situation, if there's resistance, it's not always because they don't want to go and engage in that activity. Sometimes it's because it's too much of a noisy environment. So it's worth checking that out. If you can sort out the noise environment, you may find that they will engage in certain activities such as soft play places or parties, children's parties, discos, and so on. So how does it feel? So for many autistic people have told me lots of different things over the years about the sensations that they get through their ears and the sounds that come in, and it's a whole array. So this is only a small snippet of possibilities, but things like it can really hurt, like it can actually physically hurt very much the ear area, right into the inside of your body, into your brain, and it really can hurt. It can feel itchy, it can feel prickly, it can feel like your brain is going to explode. It can actually make you feel like you're going to be sick. It can give you a feeling of of nausea. It can give headaches. It can also cause the sound and the emotion of it goes like right inside your body. So it actually feels like your body's like erupting, and you're thinking, oh my God, what is happening? It's a very intense experience when sound overwhelms a person. Not all autistic people have auditory sensitivities. Some do, some don't. Some have, and then there's a spectrum within that. And some have that and others, and some just have just that. So it's a real minefield of stuff. You know, some sounds can be really delightful and enjoyable and pleasurable and feel really good, and so you may find that they want to hear that sound over and over and over again. And George is a bit like that. Like, although he's very ear sensitive, he loves sound. Like on his apps, on his iPad, the apps that he really is interested in are sound apps with animal sounds, you know, car sounds, traffic sounds, automobile sounds, mountains, you name it. He just loves sound. So like playing on the keyboards and drums, and he doesn't like piano sounds. He's not too keen on trumpet sounds. There are certain sounds that we've learned he doesn't like, but he loves music. So please understand, just because someone's very ear sensitive doesn't mean that they don't necessarily like to hear sound. It's just being compassionate and understanding to the fact that they're very, very sensitive in that area. Another interesting thing about sensitive ears, what I've learned with George and other autistic people have told me, is that sometimes you can hear sound even though it's not an actual sound. So it's not like oh, that's a sound. Sometimes George can hear, if we're out in the wood, if we're like, even on the TV, nature programs, there was a program on about mountains. So George, it was just a silent screen looking at this mountain. George's fingers went straight in his ears. It's like the vastness, the size of the mountain through the television screen caused some kind of auditory sensation within his ears. So sometimes when we are driving through town, or we're driving through the countryside or wherever, George will have his fingers in his ears a lot. And it's not, even if the radio is off and we're just quiet in the car, there's a lot of sound, natural sound that you can't hear to the average person's ear. Almost like a sixth sensory kind of sound receiving skill. So, and sometimes, you know, and then we're going into you know, where you can see sound and you can smell colour and all of that stuff. Sometimes sound, because everything has a vibration, you know, everything, the trees, or everything that's a thing has a sound to it, because everything vibrates. So if everything vibrates, therefore it will make a sound. And I've learned that through very sensitive people, they can hear that sound of that vibration, even if to the average person they're like, what sound? I don't know, I can't hear that sound. So to be aware of that. Another thing, like doors banging, certain tones of voices, that kind of thing can really drive somebody mad if they're very sensitive. It's just really being aware. So some behaviours that you might see, my notes are down here, is if noise is overwhelming and they can't get away from it and they can't express it through, like, ow, that hurts my ears, they can't speak or say, you may find that they will scream, or they will start banging their head or hitting their head. You know, they might do that. They might do what George does, that. They might start running away. They might, you know, hit themselves or headbang the wall. They might close their eyes really tight. They might try and hide under things. They might spin around and around and around to try and diffuse the sound. They might flap and flap and flap and flap and flap and flap and flap. They might make their own sound, like they might make a load of really loud vocal sounds to white noise out the noise that's really causing them distress. They might cry. They might need to just keep moving excessively so that they can somehow kind of feel that they are regulating themselves to try and filter out the sound. Sometimes shutdown happens and they completely freeze up and don't move at all. You know, or the other end of the spectrum is that they may have very low, hypo sensitivity to sound, and they may need things on really loud. Doesn't mean that they have a hearing impairment. It's a different thing. It may mean that they actually seek sound out. So they will be like really loud themselves, and they will need the television on really, really, really loud. And they will need loud things to seek out, to try and kind of like, it's like sensory pleasure seeking stuff. So look out for that as well. When you're speaking to somebody that has that issue, then try and speak, you know, in your normal voice, in your normal way, but just try and pause more than you might do if you were speaking to somebody without that issue, just so that they can have some processing time. And then you start speaking again, and then you'll say another sentence. Now, obviously, every child person is different. Some people need, you know, a few seconds processing. Some will need a minute or so processing. You'll learn to do that with your child or person as you navigate this. But often keeping things simple, as in don't use too much words and keep on and on and on and on talking, blah, 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 blah. It just becomes a bit of a noise. Just try and slow that down, and just, especially when your children are very young, just give them very simple instructions, very easy, as in, not even that the instructions are simple, but just use fewer words and just see how they process it. It's not, you're not treating them like they're silly or anything like that. It's nothing to do with intellect or any of that. It's purely to help them process sound. Sound is really, it's a real big deal. It really, really is. So as we go on through this series, you're going to see that some of these senses do cross over, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But for now, I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot of information there. If there's anything else you want me to say, or you want to ask questions, please do in the comments box, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and happy to answer. It might be worth subscribing to this channel so that you get the full series notified in your inbox. And there are other subjects on senses that I've done about food and play, which kind of interlink with this series, so it might be worth looking at those too. So next week I am going to talk about touch, the sense of touch, tactile sense, and see where we go with that one. Well, thank you for watching. Have a great week, and I will speak to you next week. Bye for now.